What are we discussing on today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast? You already know. Time to eulogize the 2024 Arizona Diamondbacks season.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and I'm a graphic designer, so please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. There you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, please follow me on Twitter at CreativeThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks, both Twitter and Instagram, for the podcast handle. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, we'll be talking about the Dbacks offseason ahead and how they have no one to blame but themselves for the situation that they're currently in. But before we get into that, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss the end of the D-backs regular season with the split of the doubleheader between the Mets and the Braves. The D-backs season and their postseason hopes has officially come to an end. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more choked up I want to get. Guys, I am sad. I am frustrated. I'm in disbelief. The D-backs season, which was so up and down, right? The first half, terrible. The second half, amazing. D-backs were riding high the second half. That was true until the month of September, where the D-backs just collapsed and didn't do enough the final week to make the postseason and win 2-5 in their last 7 games and blew that 8-0 collapse to the Brewers last week. Like, the D-backs had so many opportunities in the month of September and this whole season where they could have added more wins to their resume. And now you're looking at a 88, 89 win team. I don't even know their exact record at this point. Number one run scoring team, 89 wins, number one run scoring team in Major League Baseball. And they're on the outside looking in of the postseason. And the D-backs have no one to blame but themselves. You could look at the doubleheader and the fact that it was scheduled on a Monday where, whoever won game number 1, they could just take off game number 2 because their playoff spot would be secured. And so the competitive disadvantage is obviously there for those two teams entering that game number 2, with the team who really needed that win desperately. They're, of course, going to be better suited to win that game number 2, putting the D-backs, at a pretty bad disadvantage. But if you're Arizona, you did that to yourself. You had so many games this month. You had so many squandered opportunities, so many poor decision-making with your team, so many defensive miscues and just things that were out of character for your team the last few months. If you're the D-backs, you did this to yourself. And there's so many different reasons, not just this last month, but the course of a full season, as to why the D-backs missed out on the playoffs in 2024. And you can start with September and how the D-backs are basically 500 the whole month. They still had a great offense this month, but the final week and a half of the season, the D-backs struggled. The Giants, the Rockies, and then you have that 8-0 game against the Brewers, and you blew that. So many winnable games that the D-backs were not able to convert. Torey Lovullo, my issues with Torey, if you've listened to this podcast from start to finish, Torey, I think has been a problem for the D-backs. As much credit as you want to give him for the second half of the season, you have to look at him and give him blame for what happened in the first half. Because if you remember, go back to the first half of the season. Remember how many games the D-backs were blowing late in games. And if you remember that one game where somehow the game came down to a Scott McGuff at bat, like situations like that were there were just too many times where Torey Lovello, I blamed him for D-backs losses early in the season and throughout this season. And you guys, I'm not the biggest Torey Lovello guy, and so I look at him as a big reason why the D-backs didn't make the postseason this year. Of course, the health of the team with up and down guys on the injured list, with Zach Gallen and Geraldo Perdomo and Jordan Montgomery and Erod and Merrill Kelly and Lourdes Gurriel and Gabriel Moreno and Christian Walker, and like the list goes on and on. But you look around baseball, you look at the Dodgers and their rotation, and you look at some of the other teams around the sport, and everyone has dealt with injuries this year. The Braves lost Ronald Acuna early in the season, the reigning MVP. Like, so many teams are dealing with adversity, so you can't blame that. If you're the D-backs, for them missing the postseason, right? You look at the rotation. That was a huge reason why they missed the playoffs this year. Your rotation did not live up to standards. You go up and down, and the D-backs rotation just wasn't good this year. Zach Gallen finished with a solid ERA, but for the most part, he was not super healthy this year. And a 3.65 ERA for Gallen, we know he can be better than that. Kelly was hurt, and when he was healthy, he was up and down. But I think he was better than that 4.71 ERA, but the ERA is the ERA. He was 11-10 this season, 1.239 WHIP. I think Fott's good and emerging, but he's still not there yet. Monty was terrible this year. Erod wasn't good this year. Like, the rotation, really, really shaky for the D-backs, and a huge reason why they missed out on the playoffs, right? You look at the bullpen, up and down. I thought the bullpen was going to be good this year, especially post All-Star break, where it felt like finally there's not one bad pitcher in the D-backs bullpen, except for maybe a Paul Sewald. And then we found out Dylan Flora wasn't good. And then Kevin Ginkel started to take a turn in the second half, especially September. Same with Ryan Thompson. Justin Martinez start to see a little bit of the shakies as well. And then all the other guys in the bullpen, whether it was Brandon Hughes or Slade who was coming out. Like, there's so many reasons as to why this D-backs team missed out on the playoffs this year. Also, don't forget how the lineup looked in the first half of the season. The slow start by Suarez and Corbin Carroll and Lourdes Gurriel. Like, there's so many little different reasons that you could look at, and it all adds up to the D-backs missing out on the postseason this year. The D-backs had their opportunities to make it to the playoffs. At one point entering September, they had like a 90% chance to make the playoffs. At one point last Saturday, I think their chances of making the postseason was like at 93% as well. But today, you needed one of the two teams to sweep to make the playoffs. And the fact that you needed other teams' outcomes and results to make it to the playoffs, the fact that you didn't control your own destiny, your fate was in the hand of someone else. You deserve to miss out on the playoffs at that point. The D-backs, it was a season that had a lot of ups and downs. For the most part, it was a season that was a lot of fun, especially the second half of the season when the D-backs were cruising. But as the season ends today, as we remove ourselves years on, years past from this season, I think all we're going to remember, and all I currently remember from this season, is just going to be sadness, frustration, and misery as the D-backs finish the MLB season as the number one scoring team in baseball, and they miss out on the playoffs. And now we'll talk about, in segment number 2 and number 3, the questions that the D-backs face as we look ahead to the offseason. But hey, if you want to buy tickets to an upcoming Arizona Cardinals game, because of course there's no more D-backs games, and the place you want to go is going to be Game Time, because Game Time is the best place for last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy theater, and more. They have this feature called all in pricing. When you toggle that feature on, You get no surprise fees at checkout. You can see your total cost up front before you buy. You can even see a panoramic view from your seat before you buy, and they always have the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you can find something better. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, all right, all right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, and let's talk about some all-season questions that the D-backs have to face over the next couple months, right? And these are going to be questions that I kind of put in order of priority. You guys could, rearrange if you want, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 questions written down. The hot 7 questions that the D-backs have to face this offseason. I think the first one, it's the biggest question, I think. Do you fire Torey Lovullo? I think it's a real question. I think it's a real scenario. I think it's a real possibility. I don't think the D-backs are going to do it. I think it's a possibility, but I don't think the D-backs are going to do it because it's just not in the D-backs DNA. Mike Hazen, Torey Lovullo, brothers, buddies. They came over from the Red Sox organization. They're tied at the hip. I don't see a scenario. Despite me thinking it should happen, I don't think Mike Hazen is going to fire Torey Lovullo. I think Lovullo should be fired for the way this season has ended, for all my gripes that I have with Lovullo that you've heard me talk about, all my grievances, his obsession with platoon splits and the way he stacks the lineups and his just overall lack for feel of the game. Lovullo, love him as an emotional leader, but sometimes lacks accountability with his team, and I just don't like the way he approaches final month of the season, especially as it started to unravel. I don't think he grabbed the reins of this team very well. I think the D-backs should move on from Lovullo. There's apparently rumors that Terry Francona, Tito, might be feeling better, might be ready to manage. Whether that's true or not, there's also Skip Shoemaker out there. Shoemaker. I think the candidates for manager right now are pretty strong already when looking at the market. So Torey Lovullo, who has now led this collapse, has led the 2018 collapse, has led one of the worst seasons in D-backs franchise history in 2021. A pretty disappointing but weird COVID year in 2020 as well. And of course, just other seasons where 2019 and 2022 didn't make the playoffs either. And so when looking at this Torey Lovullo tenure, 2 seasons where he made the playoffs, 1 season where you went to the World Series, other year you got swept by the Dodgers, the divisional round after a fun wild card game against the Colorado Rockies. Is one great run for Torey Lovullo enough to justify keeping him for another year? I don't think so. I'm ready to move on, but I don't think the D-backs will do that. But I do think that's the biggest question that they should. I do think that's at least the biggest question that the D-backs need to ask themselves this offseason. The second biggest question I think the D-backs have to face is, what do you do with the Christian Walker? The Cardinals have already announced Paul Goldschmidt is not returning to the team. Goldie at this point is definitively worse than a Christian Walker. And I do think he will be cheaper than a Christian Walker. So I will say, in the event that the D-backs don't re-sign Christian Walker, I'm not totally against going after Paul Goldschmidt. Definitely in the decline, definitely not as good as he used to be, but still has some pop and still can play some solid defense at first and still has pretty good wheels for a first baseman as well. But re-signing Christian Walker is priority number 1 for this team in terms of personnel moves, because Walker, the best defensive first baseman in the game, and if he didn't get hurt, he would have had a near 40 home run and like 110 RBI season. Like, really good year from Christian Walker, really good first baseman, and I don't think he's going to break the bank. I'm expecting around 15 to 20 million annually. He's a guy who I think is going to be like 34, 35 next year. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly. I know he's entering his mid-30s. Going to be 34 at the time of spring training next season. And so I think a 3-year, like $60 million deal for the D-backs were to offer that. If Christian Walker thinks that's fair, I would definitely do that deal. Now, if Christian Walker is looking for like a Matt Chapman type deal where it's like 6 years, 150 million, 160 million, whatever Matt Chapman got, I forgot what it was. It was like 6 years, 25 million annually. And Matt Chapman's a guy near Christian Walker's age, early to mid 30s. So if he's looking for that kind of deal, I'm not about it. I'm okay going higher in annual salary over 20 million. If Christian Walker wants to touch 21, 22, 23, I'm okay with that. I'm not against overpaying guys. I'm more about the length of contracts. So I'm okay overpaying on short-term deals. I don't like overpaying on long-term deals. So if Christian Walker wants 22, 23 annually, I'm okay doing that if it's like a 3 max 4-year deal. But if I could get 3 years with like an option for that 4th year, I think that would be perfect for Christian Walker. Then the final question we'll ask in segment number 2 is, here the D-backs front office, do you shake up the rotation? The rotation was very up and down this season, and I think with Zach Allen, you just trust he comes back next season healthy. Looks like he figures some things out in the second half with his command. Velo was up in the second half as well. Maybe that makes you really optimistic about what he can do in 2025. So he's still the ace. You're not doing anything with Zach Allen. Kelly, you're going to pick up his club option. Kelly could be a free agent if the D-backs want to get crazy, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think with Kelly, again, with like Zach Allen, you just pray he comes back healthy, get a full season. I think if Gallen, Kelly make it through the offseason fine, get a normal regiment, normal routine, come into next season fully healthy, and they have a full season with good health, I expect both of those guys to live up to their potential and ceiling. So I'm not worried about the 2 frontline starters. Fought, I think one of the reasons why his ERA was at a 4.7 is because the rotation was so down bad this year. I think the D-backs put a lot on Fott's plate, a lot of workload on Brandon Fott. He finished the year with 181 innings pitch. Big workload for him, and he had a couple starts at the end where he only went like 2 innings, right? So this could have been like 190 plus inning season if he finished those 2 starts with 4 to 6 innings like a normal Brandon Fott start. So I still think he's emerging. I still think he's improving. I think he's locked into that number 3, number 4 spot in the rotation next season. So I'm not concerned about those 3 at all. It's really about Erod and Monty. Erod has the 4-year deal, 3 years left, making 20 million annually. Not a very good season for him. Do you just say it was the health? He never got to go, really get a groove and a rhythm because he came back so late. Do you just pray on the bounce back, or do you say, you know what? Let's already look at the market for Erod and see how we can flip him. Same with Jordan Montgomery, who's definitely going to pick up his option. Do you definitely look at Jordan Montgomery as a trade chip after that option's picked up? I don't know. I don't know if you want to shake up this rotation, especially now they have Ryan Nelson who emerged this season. Do you want to shake up the rotation with the Erod or a Monty so you could get Ryan Nelson in the rotation? Just something for the D-backs front office to think about, because it's still talented on paper. If you get Erod and Monty to pitch like them pitch like they're the normal selves, like if everyone just pitches to the level that we know they can next season with Gallen, Kelly, Fott, Monty, and Erod, like again, that's a 105 win team with that kind of rotation. It just the matter of fact is, can we get that ceiling? Like, you basically got the worst case scenario from your rotation this year and still won 88 or still won 89 games. So if the D-backs rotation can bounce back a big way next year with at least Fott, Gallen, Kelly, and then just one of Erod or Monty bouncing back next season, this D-backs rotation could be one of the best in the league once again, at least on paper. And we saw this year, games aren't played on paper. So let's hope everyone can come back fully healthy in 2025. And I got a few more questions I want to ask that the D-backs need to face this upcoming offseason that we'll ask you guys in segment number 3. But hey, if you want to place a wager on an upcoming NFL game, then I suggest going to FanDuel, because, hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com to get started, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you want to play any daily fantasy sports, then I suggest using Prize Picks because Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best way to get in on the action on sports in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineup stays in place even if one of your players gets injured. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotion that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your top lineups. So go to Prize Picks today and play. Prize Picks, run your game. All right. Let's get back into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast and let's ask a few more questions that the D-backs need to face this upcoming offseason. The next one, that's something that I really care about. What are the D-backs going to do with their DH position? Because to be honest, the D-backs arguably had the best DH position this year. I think if you look at WAR, it was probably right there with, I'm guessing, the Dodgers with Ohtani and the Braves with Ozuna, because the D-backs had themselves a two-headed monster at DH because Grichuk ended the season. Again, how did Grichuk not get in the lineup more the final month? But it's neither here or there anymore. Grichuk ended the season with a 291 average, 875 OPS, and 12 home runs in 106 games. Phenomenal year for Grichuk. And then Jock Peterson, 275 average, 908 OPS, 23 home runs, 64 ribbies in 132 games. Elite production from your DH. Grichuk, $7 million club option. Jock is like a $20 million club option. I could see Jock coming back. Or I think both of them have mutuals, not club options. I could see Jock coming back because 20 million, I still think it's pretty nice for Jock. So I could see him accepting that money, coming back to some more balls with the D-backs. I think he was a great fit in the locker room. I think overall, just great vibes over all around. Grichuk, I think, is a little bit more dicey just because I think $7 million for the production he just put up, and to come back and again just have a role when you're only playing around 100 games. Like if you're Randall Grichuk, I feel like I could probably get more than 7 million, a bigger role, and I just came off a good season. Like I'm not going to accept the first offer I get. And so I'm not mad if Randall Grichuk wants to go test the open market. I would love to bring him back personally, but for his sake, I think he honestly could do better somewhere else because I don't think he got enough of an opportunity with the D-backs. D-backs seemed too preoccupied giving his playing time to others when it should have went to Randall Grichuk. But we definitely need to bring back at least one of these two guys. And if we bring back Jock, then maybe we can once again go testing in the JD Martinez waters this offseason. Eugenio Suarez, he has a player option that the D-backs need to pick up if they want to bring him back. In the first half of the season, this was an emphatic no. In the first half of the season, we didn't even want the opportunity to make this choice because we wanted him DFA'd after the first 80 games. Thankfully, the D-backs didn't do that, and now we have to make this choice in the offseason where club option for $50 million on Eugenio, and we're definitely picking that up next season. Eugenio, on the final day of the regular season, picked up 30 home runs and went over 100 RBIs and had one of his best seasons and maybe his best season since 2019, which is crazy to think about, but one of his highest OPSs in the last 5 years, one of his best run totals of the last 5 years, best RBI total since 2019, one of his best strikeout seasons of the last 5 years. Like, really a phenomenal Eugenio Suarez season and an incredible second half turnaround for Suarez after being real boo-boo the first 80 games of the year. So D-backs definitely picking up the Suarez option. And then who knows, maybe you can give him a few rest days next year if you call up Jordan Lawler and then play a little Perdomo at third base with Lawler at shortstop. Just want to see if the D-backs do that next season, because the next question is, what do you do with your upcoming free agents? One of them is Kevin Newman. I don't expect the D-backs to bring Kevin Newman back. And so he walks, and maybe you bring up Jordan Lawler to be your backup shortstop to Geraldo Perdomo, where they do the platoon thing at shortstop. Domo can also play a little third base. I could see the D-backs potentially doing that next season. Maybe Lawler's also a trade chip if the D-backs really want to get real zesty this offseason. But Josh Bell, also going to be a free agent. I expect him to go somewhere else. I don't think he wants to just be a backup first baseman all season. So I would expect Bell to go somewhere else. Unless Christian Walker signs with another team, then maybe we're back in on the Josh Bell services, which I think would be a disaster for the D-backs if he's your first baseman for 162 games. Paul Sewald, free agent. I don't think anyone wants to see Paul Sewald back, unfortunately. After being really good post-trade deadline last year and really good when he first came back off injury this year, I don't know what happened, but July hit and Paul Sewald fell off a map this season. So no Sewald coming back. Then Scott McGough, mutual option. D-backs would be dumb to pick up a mutual option on Scott McGough. So hopefully he's gone too. And then the final question I have, I'm sure I'm forgetting something. You guys can drop questions in the comments for what you think the D-backs have to answer this offseason. But the final question I have is, should the D-backs maybe try sell high on some of their younger players? A Pavin Smith, who had a very nice second half of the season, do you try to sell high on him and see what you could get? Ryan Nelson, do you look at him more of a guy like, oh, okay, all of a sudden we got our next number 5 starter, or do you try to move him for something? Jake McCarthy, who had a really nice season. Do you try to get back in the Jake McCarthy trade sweepstakes, or Adrian Del Castillo, who is a really nice bat as a catcher, but not a nice glove as a catcher? Do you try to move him as well? Just some things for the D-backs to think about. Now that we are officially in off-season mode, we will be doing awards and different kind of fun activities, drafts, because it's a long road ahead. We're going to have to figure out how to do content on this feed, how to keep you guys engaged. Of course, we'll talk about free agents, look aheads, and maybe do a little playoff talk, because to be honest, guys, I'm about to mute everything baseball on all my social platforms, because I do not want to hear anything about the sport until opening day rolls around, or until at least free agency rolls around, where I'm in off-season mode and I could think about who the D-backs are going to sign, because for the rest of the postseason, I do not want to hear anything about baseball. And so if you're with me on that, if you're a D-backs fan, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling sad, it's okay. I'm there with you. It was a long 162 games. It felt like we were going to make it to the playoffs, and sadly, we didn't. But silver lining, D-backs still have a nice young core, and that's what we'll probably talk about tomorrow. We'll probably try and make it more of an uppity episode and talk about how the D-backs still have a core of sustainability for the future. So please come back tomorrow for more Diamondbacks news, coverage, and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.